Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Google I/O.
So every year, Google has this big conference in its beautiful, sunny California campus, about an hour and a half south of San Francisco, where they sort of roll out all the things that they've been working on. The CEO will go on stage and make a big speech about how he sees the world and Google's place in it.
Garrett DeVink covers artificial intelligence for The Post, and he's going to be at Google I/O this week. He has a pretty good idea of what the focus is going to be, because it was the focus of last year's conference, too. Artificial intelligence. Here's Google's CEO, Sundar Pichai, back in 2023.
With generative AI, we are taking the next step. With a bold and responsible approach, we are reimagining all our core products, including search.
If you have used Google Search lately, and let's be real, who hasn't, you might have already noticed changes in the results served up to you. That's because Google has already started rolling out this big AI update to lots of users. Instead of pointing you to other websites, Google will reply to your question directly with complex paragraphs of AI-generated text.
They're going to put their own AI-written, AI-generated answers at the top of search results for a lot more people than sort of the preliminary tests that they've been doing up to this point.
And this week, they're expected to push these AI-generated answers out to even more people. So, like it or not, AI is coming to your Google search results.
And because AI chatbots are still quite unreliable, you really need to make sure that if you're seeing information there, that you're scrolling down, you're looking for a real link, you're cross-referencing that with other web pages to make sure that the information that Google is giving you is actually accurate.
Garrett says this change has implications for more than just the quality of the answers you might get. It also means that the way that we connect to sources of information online, to bloggers, to businesses, and yes, to newspapers, that could totally change.
You have some people saying this is potentially the end of the internet as we know it. You have other people saying, well, the internet's already kind of been changing over the last few years, and we already have to go to Google and have to go to Facebook and have to go to TikTok or Amazon. But I think this really is a big step in that direction, where 20 years ago when the internet started, it was millions of small websites. We were sort of moving between them. You might visit a dozen different websites in a specific day. In the future, you might just go to OpenAI or just go to Google, and they will answer all the questions you have for you right there.
From the newsroom of The Washington Post, this is Post Reports. I'm Martine Powers. It's Monday, May 13th. Today, Garrett talks with my co-host Elahe Zadi about how Google is using AI to try to answer your questions and why that could change the internet as we know it forever. Here's their conversation.
You know, Garrett, I want to back up here, and I think most of us think of Google as a verb. Like, I'll open up a web browser, and if I'm at Google, I just type some stuff in the search bar, hit enter, and then I get some pretty good search results. That's how a lot of us, I think of how Google works, at least until now. Is that right? Can you walk me through the evolution of Google to this moment?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, when Google started, that's exactly what it was. You type something in, Google, essentially their secret sauce was figuring out what is the way to really understand what someone's asking for, and how do we give them something that's actually helpful and answers that question, a link that will actually be the most helpful rather than someone who's trying to, spam or game those search results. And so Google's been working on that for many, many years. But over the years, they've increasingly started answering questions directly. And so they started as a search engine, and a lot of people would say they've now turned more into an answer engine, where instead of sending you links to other websites where you're going to go find an answer to your question, they try to answer the question directly. If you type in what was the score of the Super Bowl this year, it will just tell you the score rather than sending you to ESPN. The company justifies this by saying, look, we're just trying to save people time. We don't want people to be hunting through the internet when they have a very specific question that we feel we can answer directly. And a lot of publishers have said, well, if people aren't coming to my website and you're taking my content to answer their questions, aren't you stealing from me? And so Google has always said, look, we don't want to put anyone out of business. It's important for us that the web is healthy, open, that people make money on the internet. And so they've still sent a lot of traffic out to other websites. They may answer a part of a question, say you ask, about a medical problem. They may start to give you a paragraph that says, this is what it could be, but then there will be a link to the Mayo Clinic very prominently displayed that you can click on for more.
So Garrett, can you walk me through what a Google result looks like with this new technology?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's look up for great weekend trips from Washington, D.C.
Okay.
So I type that in, I hit search, and at the top of my page is an AI overview. It's labeled as AI. It says Washington, D.C. has many great weekend trip destinations, including historic cities, outdoor destinations, and beach destinations. And then,
which is just kind of funny sounding to me as a title to this. Like, it's so clearly a robot. But anyway, continue.
Right. I mean, it's very generic, And then it gives you Harpers Ferry, Baltimore, Shenandoah National Park. It kind of gives you, about 8 or 9 different options here. And not until you scroll down do you actually get some links to where this content is actually coming from. And each one of the destinations, rather than just being a name, it actually has a full paragraph explaining what is going on here. And so for the publishers, it's their content that Google is essentially reading and summarizing. And in some cases, their summarizations really border on plagiarism. I've seen examples where, phrases and sometimes even entire sentences are word for word the same as the original website that Google is summarizing here. So that's one big concern. Another big concern here is that once you've looked at this list and said, oh, these are some great ideas, you might not actually end up going to those websites that provided this content in the first place. You might just say, great, I'm going to go to Philadelphia. I'm going to go book a flight. I'm going to go book a train ticket. And so the websites that are providing this content, helping people understand things around the world and make decisions, are not even getting the traffic. They're not even getting people coming to their website, even though they're the ones providing the content.
Yeah, and I am interested on the implications this has for the broader publishing industry. Before we even get to that, though, I just am wondering, looking at this search that you shared with me, is how do I even know that this information is correct? Like, what is the technology behind this? And how can I be sure that this is actually a legit summary of Harper's Ferry, for instance? Because one of the results was Harper's Ferry, including John Brown's fort in the Battle of Harper's Ferry. It was known for its Civil War history. Like, how do I know any of that is accurate?
You do not know if that's accurate. And the companies cannot even guarantee at this point that it is accurate. One of the problems with artificial intelligence, with generative AI, is that it makes up answers all the time. It doesn't actually really understand the world in the way a human does in terms of what's real, what's not. It just understands, if you talk about Harper's Ferry, generally people talk about John Brown afterwards. And so that's how they're able to kind of create these paragraphs. But often it tries to sort of act as a people pleaser. And if it doesn't have information, if it doesn't know the answer to what you're asking, it just makes something up that
Oh, no.
generally sounds pretty good, but might not be accurate.
I mean, maybe I don't know if there's any way to train it to not be a people pleaser and just say, I don't know.
Google, they're working on this, and so are all the other AI companies. And I do think Google's put a lot of work into this over the last year. And that's also why, instead of just fully generating the answer themselves, they actually read other websites and summarize them using the AI. And by doing that, they do get much more accurate answers. But there's still so many examples. If you play around with this tool for an hour or two, you will definitely find mistakes. And even things that you think Google should be very good at. The other day I had to do an interview with someone who was in Europe, and I Googled, what time is it in London? And it actually gave me the wrong time, which seems to be a very simple computer question, but the generative AI gave me the wrong answer.
Garrett, what do we know about where the information in these results is coming from? Is it only, reputable websites or publishers, professional writers? What do we know about that, and how is that influencing the results?
We don't actually know a lot. Google is really a black box. They don't tell the world how their systems work, ostensibly so that spammers can't game those systems. But all we know is really from observation. And so they do show some links at the bottom of their AI answers that they say that's where they're pulling the answers from. And most of them are, decent sources. They're, bloggers that have, long histories of writing a lot. They're government websites, they're news articles. And Google has spent a lot of time trying to establish, who is trustworthy on the internet, who is consistent, and who isn't. And so the company is trying to draw from better sources, but at the same time, they're also pushing into drawing more from social media comments, from trying to get more human voices, because a lot of the blog content on the internet now is written by AI. And to try to solve that problem, Google has actually been really prioritizing over the last 6 months or so comments from Reddit and Quora in the top of search results. And it definitely is also able to sort of feed those into its AI answers as well. And a lot of people who study Google's patterns very closely are saying that Google prioritizing these social media comments in terms of answering search questions is a bit of a sign of how the future of AI-generated search answers may evolve, in that instead of drawing on professionally written content, they will draw more and more on social media comments in order to write the AI answers.
So that raises for me the question of how accurate will these answers be if what they're pulling from are social media generated answers rather than professional researchers and writers who, as part of their job have to look into and verify the information that they're posting on the internet versus a random commenter on Reddit?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's absolutely a huge concern. Google would say that they're working on that they have technology to sort of like back check things. But, absolutely. I mean, Google also, they don't necessarily claim to be, a standard of truth on the internet. They definitely want to provide people with good information. But
wait, really? That's that? Because I feel like the whole thing about Google and why people use it is because they feel like it is giving you good answers, like it is trustworthy.
Google definitely wants to be trustworthy, and they don't want to, give people something that doesn't answer their question or, points them in completely the wrong direction. But Google is adamant that it's not a publisher, it's not a news organization, it's not out there to tell you what's right and what's wrong. It's simply there to connect you to other things on the internet.
Is Google investing a lot into this?
The amount of money going into this tech is absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, these companies already spend billions and billions of dollars every year on research and development. But when it comes to AI, it's just being blown out of the water. Google said a couple weeks ago that they will be spending more than $12 billion a quarter. So $12 billion every 3 months just on building and running new data centers for them to put all the computers that they need to run these AI systems. And so what you're seeing in the technology world is a massive investment of money into AI, into gathering all this data, into crunching it all together and trying to make smarter and smarter AI models, and in paying for all the energy that it takes to run these AI models in their giant data centers.
After the break, Garrett explains the forces behind Google's big AI push. We'll be back in a moment.
So, Garrett, I have to ask, why is Google doing this? Why are they investing so much money and so many resources into developing their technology? What is the goal here?
So it's a very interesting situation because Google actually came up with a lot of this technology several years ago, and they didn't rush out to put it into their search engine. They used it to improve some of the translation, when you typed in a search and it auto-completed what it thought you wanted to say, that was an example of a very early use of using generative AI. But it wasn't until OpenAI went and put ChatGPT out in front of the world and the whole tech industry said, oh my goodness, this is definitely the next big thing. Let's go for it. That Google had to say, oh crap, we have to really start using this ourselves. And so ChatGPT came out, a lot of people said, oh, instead of using Google search to answer my questions, I'm just going to go to ChatGPT and ask it. And then Microsoft, which is Google's arch enemy. These companies do not like each other. They've been, fighting each other for 20 years. Microsoft did a deal with OpenAI and said, oh, we're going to use OpenAI's technology and we're going to put it in our own search engine, which is called Bing and is very, very tiny compared to Google. But the red alarm bells really started ringing at Google, and they said, this is an all hands on deck situation. We cannot be seen to be losing to these other companies. Their stock price went down. Wall Street was saying, Google, this might be the end of Google. They're no longer innovative. They're no longer at the cutting edge. And Google said, we cannot have this. And so they took all their AI technology and they started putting it into everything. And so, there's a school of thought that Google doesn't even really want to be doing this and putting AI in search, but because of the competitive pressure from other companies, they don't really have a choice.
Garrett, I know we've discussed or at least touched upon some of the negative implications of Google embracing this particular technology for its search engine, but I'm wondering on the other hand, what benefits could there be for just regular users who, quickly want to find out information and Google something, and then instead of, bouncing around to different websites, they're provided with, oh, here's a paragraph or two, or here's a bigger summary rather than having you click through?
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of the time people who use Google a lot, maybe they're researchers or journalists like us, we complain that Google has gotten worse. But when you talk to regular people, they don't really say that, and they'll say, well, it's pretty helpful. Generally, I can find what I'm looking for. I don't necessarily need to go to ESPN to find out what time the Super Bowl is. If Google can just tell me, that's great. They've saved me 5 seconds out of my day. And so Google's argument is that this is just a continuation of this. They say, look, we're not in the business of necessarily helping other companies. We're in the business of helping our users, regular people, connecting them to the information they want as soon as they can. The other element is that there's a lot of spam and just junk on the internet, as we're all aware. And a lot of that has sort of worked its way into Google by trying to game Google's search algorithm and trying to get to the top of search results. And so that's another thing that has made using Google difficult for a lot of people, because when you look for something, you might have to go to a bunch of websites before you find one that's actually good, because the websites might just be repeating what another website said that they stole. They might be just saying, platitudes that are general and don't actually give you any new information or detail. And so if Google is able to use AI to sort of snuff out the best information and just put it right at the top of search results, that could be more helpful for people. But the problem is if they end up putting a lot of people out of business, people who review shoes actually spend time with those shoes and really try to provide good information, or journalists who actually attend city council meetings, listen to what's being said, look for new details and write up that report. If those kinds of people can no longer make a living on the internet, then there's this huge question of okay, well, if the quality of information on the internet goes down, then everyone, including Google, ends up losing.
Right. It's cannibalizing the well from which it's drawing. And, I also cover the news media industry, and this is something that a lot of local newspapers are contending with all the time, that, they would say we are fighting for our lives on the internet. And after a while, there's not going to be those reporters in those city council meetings to even get that content so that Google can pull it together for people.
Yeah. And when you ask Google about this, they say, look, exactly, we don't want to create that situation. Some people who are more cynical might say, look, Google doesn't actually need local reporters, because if they don't exist anymore, we don't really know what we're comparing things to. Google can just go onto Twitter, see what a bunch of random people tweeted about that city council meeting, and put together an AI summary based on those tweets. And maybe it won't be as good as if there was an actual professional reporter listening to the city council. But if you don't know what to compare it to, maybe that summary is all you're going to get and you'll accept that. And because Google is really the only place to go right now on the internet in terms of searching for information, they can kind of get away with that because they have that dominant market position.
Garrett, it also makes me wonder whether if the quality of the Google search goes down, whether actually people will still want to use it. And then also, are there even alternatives for people anymore if they don't want AI-generated answers anywhere on the internet?
I've asked Google, can you turn this off? And they haven't really given me an answer. The answer right now is no. You are getting this whether you like it or not. And I think a lot of people may have heard of AI over the last year, but they probably aren't necessarily using it. This is going to be the first interaction with generative AI that a lot of people have because everybody needs to use Google. And I'm sure there will be websites that pop up, small search engines that say, hey, you don't like Google's AI, why don't you try our search engine? But as we all know, those search engines have never been able to break into Google's business, and Google still dominates more than 90% of all searches worldwide. Really, the only up-and-coming alternative is maybe OpenAI's ChatGPT, but that's an AI answer engine as well. And so I do think that when it comes to finding information online, AI is here to stay because the biggest companies want it to be here.
Thank you, Garrett, so much for joining me.
Of course, my pleasure.
Garrett DeVink covers artificial intelligence for The Post. He spoke with my co-host, Elahe Izadi. One more thing before we go. Last weekend, the weather in DC was pretty good. So I spent a lot of time in my backyard, gardening and weeding, and thinking about how I should stop mowing the lawn. The Climate Solutions team at The Post has a new, eye-opening story about the benefits of leaving your lawn unmown. And it shows, with some very vivid animation, what actually happens within your lawn, to the flowers and the birds and the bees and the worms, when the grass is left to grow just a few inches higher than normal. This story has changed the way that I look at my lawn, and it might convince you to give nature an opportunity to do its thing. To check out this story and more coverage from the Post Climate Solutions team, click the link in our show notes and at postreports.com. That is it for today's episode of Post Reports. Thank you so much for listening. And thanks to the many listeners who filled out our audience survey. We got so many responses. We're so excited to dive into the results. But if you missed the survey, there is another way that you can help us. Leave us a review in your podcast app. You might be surprised how much this matters. It helps people who are looking for new podcasts to discover our show, and it helps us learn what kinds of stories are resonating with listeners. So whether you listen on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or on one of the many other podcast apps, just take a second to rate us and share why Post Reports is part of your listening routine. Thank you so very much. Today's show was produced by Emma Talkoff. It was mixed by Sean Carter and edited by Lucy Perkins. Thank you also to Heather Kelly. I'm Martine Powers. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from the Washington Post.